Guten Abend, everyone. My name is Dakota Wappis. I'm a GA in the Department of Communication Studies and a coach of the debate team. Although Guten Abend may be the only phrase that I have recently learned in German that means good evening, good thing our presentation tonight will be entirely in English, a language that I can speak pretty fluently. If you didn't know, the Modern Languages Department here at Ball State University puts on a German week every year, and for the past 3 years, we've been hosting and presenting a debate that discusses culture about Germany. So, tonight's topic we will be debating is, was the German reunification successful? A topic that is definitely appropriate since the theme of this year's German week is 25 years of German reunification. So, without any further ado, I'm going to get us started. Our first speaker tonight will be a member of the debate team who's been on the team for 2 years now. Keaton Middleton will be starting with a speech in the affirmative that will last about 4 minutes. And with that, we will begin.
It began with calls for a better life. It ended with a wall no bigger in size than the Great Wall of China, but a meaning arguably just as powerful, falling on national television. Many Americans know this as nothing more than the words of our president and an end to the Cold War. But for Germans, it is something much more. We are here to discuss the reunification of East and West Germany, and as the affirmative, its certain success. Germany has become a global leader both politically and economically. This proof can be very clearly seen by simply seeing their GDP and GDP per capita. According to the World Bank, Germany's GDP per capita, one of the best known forms of evaluating a citizen's value of life or quality of life, is $48,000 in Germany. That is very considerably nice, considering that the United States is 8th, and that places Germany at the 15th spot in GDP ranking. This is above France, the United Kingdom, and Belgium. So in terms of having a very solid economy, a political scheme that's working excellent for their country, they are certainly right up there with the rest of the top dogs. In addition, unavoidable proof of success can be found in the livelihood of the German people. It takes a lot of rebuilding to be able to once again have citizens with a high quality of life, just as the West does. Better summed up by a reporter from CBC News, Wakas Chikatsi, another way to measure the success of reunification is by looking at what people are buying. And this is definitely very true. He goes on to say that if you look at things like ownership of televisions, TVs, ownership of cars, it goes on to talk about computers, East Germans have essentially caught up substantially with the West Germans, which is very hard to do considering that East Germany was underneath a tyranny of rule and an economy that was completely collapsing, disallowing anybody to own things that the West could or that any country nearby could. In terms of what this means for the reunification being a success, if the people of East Germany can own the things that the rest of the world can own, can have a life that is as pleasing as the rest of the world, have freedoms that the rest of the world definitely has been getting for decades, then why should East Germany be left behind? And that's what reunification allowed, is for them to catch up and be a part of the rest of the world and play a real part in all the decisions that are being made in it. Eastern Germany was under the rule of the Soviet Union, which means that the Red Army played more than a large role in governing the communist state, something that has gone lost with the passage of time. Is how the Red Army treated the citizens of East Germany. According to the New World Encyclopedia, the Red Army was known to have committed several acts of violence against hundreds of thousands, if not up to the larger estimate of 2 million women and girls. This tyranny occurred until 1954, certainly long enough to scar the people of Germany and make them no longer feel safe in their own country. This leads a country to do things such as revolt. The people revolted and connected with family long forgotten. Without this reunification, Eastern Germany surely would still be in the state of discontent it had struggled to survive through for decades. In summary, the German reunification was certainly a success. The numbers don't lie, and they are certainly high in the right places. The people are happier under the rule that is on their own terms and determined by their vote. And of course, if households all throughout Germany own similar things that with that money we know they have, then what evidence could there possibly be to support the reunification being anything other than a success? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Greg Carbo, and my partner and I are here today to convince you the reason why German reunification was unsuccessful. So called for by democracy and implemented on a country barely learning to stand on its new shaky foundation, German reunification may not have created the new utopia that the affirmative stated. From an outside perspective, East and West Germany were like fraternal twins, the same yet different, with different wants and different needs. Reunification has attempted to join two fundamentally different countries together, and although stated by the affirmative as successful, we take a closer look at the finer details and see that the country has a lot larger problems than we think. So my first contention, although some areas of East Germany have improved, the country as a whole is struggling to support the numerous debt and financial responsibility of supporting a newly formed nation. West Germany has been given the task of basically rebuilding a whole nation by itself, and the needs of the people increases, so does the bill. The process opened up at a running tab of 25 years that reached between 1.5 trillion and 2.5 trillion and was still climbing, according to various accounts and statistics proven by the Wall Street Journal. The affirmative side tried connecting the standard of living between Germany and the United States with individual households. One thing that is all too evident and similar between Germany and the United States is that while GDP might be high, the enormous debt that the country is growing is fundamentally going to bring back negative consequences. We stand confident that if we can agree the United States is in a dangerous economic crisis, then Germany's in the same boat. So my second contention is going to go against the affirmative here. And the affirmative stated that when the evaluating in a country is successful, one must note that GDP and GDP per capita. However, it is easy to make an increase on a short-term success versus a long-term commitment. And an article from Spiegel Online International stated an estimated 1.3 trillion or 1.6 trillion have flowed from the former West Germany to the corner of East Germany over the last 20 years. What has that money achieved? Historic neighborhoods have been restored, new autobahns built, and the telephone network brought up to date. But most of the money was spent on social benefits such as welfare payments. The anticipated economic upswing failed to materialize. This just shows that as of now, the GDP has increased, but the long run might not look so bright for this new foundation. And so for my third contention, although the affirmative stated that most people have higher access to new commodities like televisions and telephones, most people in East Germany aren't able to afford them. In a direct clash to what Keaton said in his second contention, the Wall Street Journal stated, a closer inspection of ensuing months revealed aging industrial facilities, a crumbling infrastructure, and unfolding environmental hazards. The productivity of East German workers amounted to less than half of their Western counterparts. And the waiting list for rattling Trabant or Waterbug car could stretch 7 years. Only 1 in 10 households had their own telephone, and even workmen's clothing could be hard to come by in a workman's state. This proves that although the amount of people that gained new commodities increased, they were often short-lived luxuries that ran out basically as soon as they started. And the same government tasked now of supporting Eastern Germany. To wrap up all three of my contentions, I would like to please ask that the audience agrees with the negative. Thank you.
Is that, so economists use GDP per capita to measure the quality of life. And if the GDP per capita is even across Germany, then why was the reunification unsuccessful?
Well, we have to see how the money is established. Billions of dollars were needed just to convert the East Germany mark to the Western German mark, which was valued completely differently. The two different economies had to merge, and therefore giving a country, Eastern Germany, who didn't nearly have the same amount of income as West Germany, more money, so then it would increase everyone's GDP. My question for you is, if reunification was successful and the country as a whole should be better off, then why do most West Germans still have such a higher standard of living than those of East Germans?
Well, that's simply just because no economy is perfect. In other words, the reunification was clearly a success, not because everyone in Germany is wealthy, but because everyone in Germany has the ability or the choice to be wealthy if they so choose. It's similar to America. It's all about the ability to move out of the area you're in. Prior to this, they were unable to because there was a wall preventing them. And another question for you. In your second contention, you talk about how much money was spent in Eastern Germany on things like infrastructure, welfare. Is that more or less than what was spent on it prior to the reunification?
Well, as my information stated, and bringing it back to the main contention, is that regardless of how much was spent, it failed to marginalize. So that last statistic I said is that, yes, it might have spent a lot, and it might have been more, but it failed to marginalize. It failed to actually become something. So, like my dad said, and looking at the end goal, the country was still struggling after all that money spent. So no matter how much money was spent, the fact that it's still struggling is what we're looking at. And for my second question, you said that the Red Army terrorized East Germans until 1954, thus making them not feel safe in their country. However, wasn't the wall torn down in 1989? If the Red Army was so cruel, then why did they just stop for 35 years?
So my main point in bringing up the Red Army wasn't so much how the time up until the wall was torn down. It was the scar that left on the German people and how they felt about the country they lived in. And what the situation did end, as I had mentioned, in 1954. But what it did was it changed everyone in that country's views of who was in charge of them. Because if you have something like the military that's supposed to be protecting your people, doing something like what they had done, then that is simply something that prevents the feeling of safe, and you no longer want to be in that country anymore.
All right.
And that's it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lafayette Deshaun Jordan, and I'm going to start by refuting all of the actual negative points and actually move into some of my own points. So, first, the negative team stated earlier that while Eastern Germany is doing well financially, as a whole, Germany is struggling to support the newly formed nation. This point has been proven false by the BBC. Imagine a country whose inhabitants work fewer hours than almost any others, whose workforce is not particularly productive, and whose children spend less time at school than most of its neighbors. Hardly a recipe for economic success, you might think. But the country described above is none other than Germany, Europe's industrial powerhouse and the world's second largest exporter, a country whose economy has single-handedly stopped the Eurozone from falling back into recession, and the only nation rich enough to actually save the euro. So this directly goes in refutation with what the negative team was saying. So that the debt of reconstruction in Eastern Germany has stopped Germany as a whole from being very successful. So I'll go into my second and third refutation of the negative team. The negative team also offered two arguments that revolved around the same pertinent idea. The negative points to the idea that it's easy to make an increase of a short-term success versus long-term accomplishments, referring to the country's GDP and GDP per capita, and to the idea that most people in Eastern Germany aren't able to afford televisions and telephones. But what the negative team has failed to see and refuting our point is that the success of German reunification is defined not by how rich people are, but by their quality of life. It's based on the freedom and rights that they have. Eastern and Western Germany is two sides of the same coin, comparable to a city such as Detroit, Michigan. It is well known that there are two parts of this city that are simply not great places to live. But what matters is that they have the same right and every freedom of any other person in that city. For this reason, we refute any idea stating that infrastructure or wealth itself defines the success of reunification. Also, moving on to actually me and my partner's contentions, we say that citizens of East Germany wanted to leave long before the destruction of the Berlin Wall. This directly refutes the negative points regarding the difference in ideas and the lifestyles of East Germany and West Germany. In other words, these two places did have different ideas and lifestyles, but the fact is that they actually are both benefited from becoming a multiplier of ideas. The reunification of Germany allowed them not only to become a melting pot, but also allowed them to spur innovation in both their economic and domestic sectors. And then also moving in two other points that we want to make is that overall, unification was successful because not just of the melting pot of ideas, but because seen just by their economy right now, it shows directly that they actually were successful, and both sides, East Germany and West Germany, can afford the same things. So I ask that you please vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Cross, and I'll be representing the negative team today. I'm going to start off by refuting some of the points made by the affirmative team and then move into some points of my own. Although the affirmative team stated that Germany is the strongest economy in Europe and the second largest exporter in the world, this still does not refute my partner's point, stating that Eastern Germany is not only a burden on all of Germany, but is also not showing any signs of improvement. To refute the point made by the affirmative team suggesting that the reunification has resulted in Germany acting as a positive leader in the international community, well, I'd like to point out that their influence has not been positive, but instead overbearing, as it takes away from the freedom of other nations to make their own decisions. From an article in the Global Post, from the words of David Rowe, Germany, long considered a reliable and financially generous supporter of European integration, has begun to anger some of its fellow European Union members with its stubborn, go-it-alone approach. Berlin's tough stances during the euro currency crisis have prompted critics to accuse it of bullying smaller countries. The rhetoric culminated on Wednesday when the Luxembourg Prime Minister and chairman of the group of Eurozone finance ministers called Berlin's behavior un-European, a stinging rebuke on par with one U.S. state calling another un-American. The overwhelming feeling is that Europe's largest economy has decided that if it must pay to keep the European dream alive, it will do so on its own terms. It's Germany's way or the Autobahn. What this piece of evidence tells us is that Germany is using its extreme level of international power, which is a result of the reunification, to micromanage and even bully other smaller nations. This points out the global damages that have resulted from the German reunification. Not only has the reunification resulted in the suppression of other nations, but also it has resulted in immeasurable sacrifices faced by the people of East Germany. In the process of this change, the East Germans lost their cultural identity and livelihoods, as they were forced to accommodate to a new and decreased overall quality of life. According to an article from Reuters News, from the words of Eric Kirkson, free speech and freedom to travel have been great, but the price has been high. Millions lost their jobs, their homes, as well as the fabric of their society and their way of life. Many are still struggling to come to terms with life in reunited Germany and are understandably nostalgic about life in East Germany, to the great irritation of West Germans who have helped pay 1.6 trillion euros to rebuild the East. Reasons for their disenchantment can be seen everywhere. The Eastern population has been struck by about 2 million. Unemployment soared. Young people are moving away in droves, and what was one of the Eastern Bloc's leading industrial nations is now largely devoid of industry. In other words, the reunification of Germany has resulted in both financial and non-measurable consequences, as the people of East Germany have involuntarily sacrificed their culture and livelihoods. And for these reasons, I ask for a vote in the negative.
If citizens of East Germany were willing to risk their lives to cross over the Berlin Wall, doesn't this show that East Germans actually did voluntarily want reunification?
Just because they wanted a successful reunification doesn't mean that they got one. I think that when they made that decision to move into West Germany, they weren't looking for unemployment and cultural destruction. And what does a successful reunification look like? Who benefits from a successful reunification? And do you think these benefits were worth the sacrifices?
Well, I would say that, as I said in my first speech, that a successful reunification looks like when everybody has the same freedoms and everybody has the same opportunity. So not everybody might be wealthy in that country, but they have the opportunity to become wealthy if needed to. And then in terms of who benefits from a successful reunification, I think it's both sides, because if you're having a melting pot of ideas, just like the United States, that spurs innovation and creativity.
Okay. If we should be concerned with quality of life for these citizens, does this not include considerations of high unemployment and destruction of culture? Are these not issues of quality of life?
Well, I would say that they are issues of quality of life, but I think overall, in terms of Germany's economy, I think it shows that reunification was actually a good idea. And I think almost every country actually has debt. That doesn't necessarily mean that becoming one nation is a bad thing. And I have one more question. So wouldn't the increase in Germany's economy, economic growth, prove that the quality of life of Germans has inherently increased?
No, because quality of life as a whole does not just consist of financial factors, and it certainly cannot be measured numerically. And that's all.
So, to summarize the AF case, I think it comes down to a couple main points that really need to be taken home. One of the most important ones is that had the reunification not occurred, East Germany would still be as it was. And that is certainly the most important thing. Prior to the reunification, East Germany was stricken, it had been fallen, and they needed rising. In the end, the wall had to come down for the people to rise, and that's what it came down to in the end entirely. Sure, many Americans think of it as nothing as the end of the Cold War, Reagan gave a speech on TV, all of that. But what really matters the most is that now you have East Germans rising. You have them maybe tearing down slightly the West, as you will hear the neg say today. The West isn't as good off as isn't well off as it was prior to the reunification. But what matters is that the West is help rising up the East. And had they not been there to do that, we would still be seeing a very struggling East Germany. So, sure, the West has been torn down a notch, but you can see that Germany as a whole has shown significant progress. They're the second in exports. They are right up there with the rest of the top dogs in Europe, even close to the United States in terms of GDP, and certainly GDP per capita. $48,000 per person is great. Obviously, not everyone can have that. It's the same in the United States, but they have the ability to do so. And having the ability to do so means that they have a freedom and they have the right to pursue something. And that right alone shows a success. Thank you.
As a last and closing final statement, I would like to say that the affirmative has made the argument that Germany as a whole is better off because of reunification. But we would like to reiterate that we're looking that East Germany is better. The affirmative stated that East Germany is better off because of reunification. But we would like to reiterate that we're looking at the country as a whole. And with that country as a whole, because two individual countries have had to join together, it has caused one side of the country and the other side of the country to be fundamentally completely different. And when looking in retrospect, looking at the country as a whole, because the economic and social baggage that East Germany has brought to West Germany and made the reunification unsuccessful. Our contentions are still proven that throughout the reunification process, it is technically like kind of joining fraternal twins that have different needs and different wants, yet trying to fundamentally put that under the same government. So with that contention, I would like to state that please vote for the negative. Thank you. Okay. So do you acknowledge that the Eastern franc was considerably less strong than the Western mark, thus showing that one country's economy basically had to support the crumbling economy of another by any means necessary?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, one economy was certainly worse off than the other. But by joining, the point that needs to be taken home from even what you're saying is that it increased, well, technically they became one, but it increased the value of any money at all in the other in terms of Eastern Germany. Eastern Germany wasn't doing great, but they were better off afterwards, and better off in terms of what they were is certainly a good thing.
You want to ask first our next question?
Go ahead.
So what you agree that the quality of life of its people is more important than infrastructure and debt responsibility?
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, would you agree that the quality of life of Germany's people overall is more important than the debt that they incur?
Well, I would say that debt and quality of life go hand in hand for the most part. And so when looking at the quality of life, yes, the quality of life for some might be better, but as the country as a whole, that's what you're looking at. And when national debt and national deficit and other infrastructure is being harmed because of that, that is when the whole country is being harmed.
Germany has been reprimanded for having an overbearing presence in history twice. How many times are we going to have to learn that Germany just likes to be intrusive?
I think that comes down to grudges. I believe that, sure, Germany has had a track record in the past for not exactly making the best decisions in terms of politics. But what it comes down to now is that they are no longer under that type of political control. They are no longer an extreme dictatorship or communist country in any way. No sort of fascism exists there, and that makes a huge difference in what the people are willing to do when they're following their leader. When everything's equal, you pretty much just do what you're supposed to. So I don't think we have to worry about them in the future. I have one question I'd like to ask. Would you agree that if East Germany is better than what it was 20 years ago, then there's some sort of a success there?
Did you say, I'm sorry, East Germany or just Germany?
East Germany. Well, technically it's Germany now, but what was East Germany?
Well, I think that, as I brought up in some of my evidence previously, I don't think that, I would argue and say that it's not better than it was before.
Okay.
And if you're looking at it and you see 10 people without TVs and you give one of them a TV, that is a 10% increase. So you could say that it is better, but there's still 9 other people within that area that do not have TVs and are not living with that same higher standard.
Okay. Any question?
So would you agree that 171 people being killed trying to actually cross over the Berlin Wall shows that taking down of the wall and reunification overall actually saves more lives in the long run?
Well, looking at the country as a whole, when it comes down to 171 people out of the millions that live in Germany, to specify the whole country's ideology and views based off those 171 people and the people that are being connected to those, that's a very small population within the larger population. So when looking at the country as a whole, I would say that we would focus on the majority. And my question is that, Deshaun, you stated that East Germany is similar to Detroit in the fact that they are both in the same country, but yet substantially lower standard of living, for example. But so does the same opportunity mean the same environment? Because we can't walk around specific parts of Detroit without getting killed. Same thing with Germany, though. Detroit has the highest murder and one of the highest incarcerated people per capita within its city borders. And so that affects the whole country, right?
I think that overall, but the United States, we don't kick out Detroit just because they have bad numbers, because there are other places that have bad numbers too. So I think as a country, we come together as a federal government and try to help things, just as the reunification helped with creating a unification in the government overall.
Yeah, definitely. To add on to that, I don't think you can turn your back on something just because it has made mistakes. I mean, prior to the mistake that they've made, where Detroit is now what it is, right? But prior to that, it was the powerhouse, the capital. It was literally the reason why the United States became what we are, because of all of the manufacturing that occurred there. So we can't just turn our back on the fact that now we are no longer a manufacturing company, right? It's the same, or a manufacturing country. It's the same thing with Germany. I mean, in essence, like, yeah, the East Germany has gone through some stuff, but you have to hold out and you have to hope that things turn better, or for the better. And that very well could happen. You don't just give up on them, I think would be our perspective on the matter. I have one final question. Would you agree that funds spent on infrastructure and on welfare to support nations less fortunate are funds well spent?
I think that it depends on the nation's economic, where they are at that point in time. So I think that depends on many factors.
And kind of going off on that, like I said earlier, if it doesn't marginalize, it doesn't work. Yes, you could spend as much money as you want, and you could focus as many resources, but if it doesn't do anything in the long run, and it doesn't marginalize and materialize, then what's the point?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, you've seen this entire debate, and I think that we've proven as an affirmative that we have won this debate. During this debate, me and my partner have clearly demonstrated how Germany's reunification has been successful overall. We have refuted all of the negative claims and have also supported our claims with pure facts. Germany is now an economic powerhouse, as we stated earlier before, solely keeping the euro intact and supporting other nations that are struggling economically, showing that they are strong themselves. In addition, Germany's GDP per capita indicates that they experience a good quality of life overall. And more importantly, citizens of East Germany want to leave long before the destruction of the Berlin Wall, showing that this is their choice. The reunification allows Germany to become a melting pot of ideas and innovation, thus allowing progress in both its domestic and economic sectors. And for all of these reasons, I strongly urge for a vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Throughout this debate, my partner and I have both directly refuted the points made by the affirmative team, as well as supported our own claims demonstrating why the reunification of Germany was unsuccessful. Germany is facing an enormous amount of debt in attempts to rebuild and support a new nation. These financial sacrifices have failed to show any long-term improvements in Eastern Germany. Not only is the nation suffering financially, but also the citizens of East Germany have been unwillingly stripped of their cultural identity and overall quality of life. On a global level, the reunification has resulted in negative consequences on Germany's acquisition of a moderate amounts of power has led to the bullying of other nations. For these reasons, I urge for a vote in the negative today. Thank you.
This video was produced as part of our German Week, celebrating 25 years of German unity. We would also like to thank the German Information Center of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany for their generous contribution.